Today we will be doing a whirlwind tour of EBHO's 40-year history. So it's great to have everybody here. Just to let people know we are recording this event so that we can make it available to folks who weren't able to actually tune in today. I am going to go ahead and introduce all of our panelists, and we will launch into the program in just a second. Okay, let me start by introducing our panelists in alphabetical order. Ronnie Boyd is the Community Faith and Justice Organizer with EBHO. Gloria Bruce is Program Director at Crankstart and former EBHO Executive Director. Rami Dare, Regional Director of Real Estate for Mercy Housing and a former board member of EBHO. Anthony Federico, Senior Consultant with Health Management Associates and a former Associate Director with EBHO. William Goodwin is a leader in the Resident Empowerment Program with Hope Solutions and a current EBHO board member. Marianne Leshen, Consultant with City of Oakland, Consultant and a City of Oakland retired annuitant, meaning she's back there working. First OHO staff person and then a board member with EBHO as well. Michael Rawson is the litigation director and founder of the Public Interest Law Project and a founding member of EBHO. And Davina Sriudam is a suburban organizer with EBHO. And that is our panel. Welcome to all of you, and thanks so much for joining us and participating today. So 40 years ago, a small group of housing activists began gathering for monthly brown bag lunch meetings to talk about Oakland's affordable housing crisis and how to address it. And this included folks from tenants organizations, progressive groups in Chinatown, OCUR, community economics, legal aid folks, fair housing folks. From the beginning, it was a pretty broad-based group of people concerned with Oakland housing issues. The group soon came to be known as Oakland Housing Organizations, or OHO, and its first chairperson was Bob Chastain, who had recently retired as housing manager from the city of Oakland. And many of OHO's original members are still active in advocacy today. Some of them are on our panel, and some of them are in our audience. In 1986, OHO entered into a formal relationship with local community organization OCUR to act as our fiscal sponsor and provide OHO with its first staff person and technical consultant. And let's turn it over to Marianne to talk about our very early beginnings.
Thanks, Jeff, and great to see everybody. Yeah, I had to dig a little bit into, my memory banks 40 years ago. You can see why I'm a retiree, almost. Yeah, I was working for OCUR, the Oakland Citizens Committee for Urban Renewal, which is a long-standing sort of civic citizens participation organization in the city. And I started attending the, basically they were brown bag lunch meetings at the Asian Resource Center, and people would sit around the table and talk about their housing projects. The affordable housing developers sat around and, talk about the different sort of, NIMBY, although we didn't use the term NIMBY at the time, but, all the different challenges they were facing. And, became clear because of the role I played at OCUR that there was an ability to provide some staff support. So I began doing that, just kind of being in charge of communications, telling people about meetings. I don't think we had the internet then. I'm just going to say sending emails. I don't think we were sending emails then. But basically kind of being a little bit of like the glue, the staff support, and OCUR, was very supportive of my role in doing that. And then, I can remember pretty clearly one of those memories that stands out, sitting around, yet another table at the OCUR office at the corner of Broadway and 14th. I know Mike Rawson was there. I'm wondering if you remember Mike, James Van, Larry Hinson, Bob Chastain, and started talking about, well, maybe we could raise some money to sort of, really formally pay for staff and not have it just be as ad hoc as it had been. So we got our first grant from the Grabodi Foundation. It was $25,000, I think, for 2 years, something like that. I remember at the time, Councilmember Nate Miley was quite supportive and, put in a good word for us. And the one thing I just want to mention, because I know I just have like probably another few seconds, is as we put together that grant proposal and thought about what we wanted to do with this, kind of growing idea, I had reached out to Choo Choo in San Francisco. That's the Council for Community Housing Organizations that have been around since the late 70s, and really kind of try to get a feel for that model, which was very organizing based. And I come from a background in organizing prior to being at Occur, and really try to infuse that initial kind of kickoff with the sense that people need to pull together to organize for their interests. That has, that was sort of the foundational building blocks of the organization. And I'm just in awe every time I get an opportunity like this to engage with EBHO, to see how that has stayed a part and parcel of the organization, which makes it so unique, which makes it so wonderful, and really proud to have been a part of this, small stage, kicking it off back in the mid to late 80s. So I'll hand it back to Jeff.
Great, thank you, Marianne. So in those early days, EBHO was already working on what today we call the 3P. So we were working on tenant rights, preservation, particular preservation of single room occupancy hotels, land use and general planning, as well as just general support for having more affordable housing. In October of 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake hit the Bay Area, and it caused widespread damage. Downtown Oakland was particularly hard hit. More than half a dozen residential hotels were severely damaged and red tagged, displacing the extremely low income residents, removing housing of last resort from the housing supply. So working with legal aid attorneys, the city's housing department, and local nonprofits, OHO spearheaded an effort to acquire and rehabilitate those hotels, over 900 units, as permanent and mostly service-enriched affordable housing. In the course of events, the Red Cross had announced that it had raised more donations than needed for the immediate emergency response, and was actually going to shift those monies to other parts of the country to deal with other disasters. OHO objected and basically forced the Red Cross to keep the money in the Bay Area, and in kind of an unprecedented move, to use it for ongoing recovery and not just for emergency response. And those funds were made available for a pre-development loan program that OHO administered, and that was really sort of the seed money that allowed the nonprofits to go out, acquire the hotels, and secure permanent financing from the redevelopment agency, the state, and FEMA, and rehab those projects. And 35 years later, most of those hotels are still operating as extremely low-income service-enriched housing. OHO continued to grow through the early 1990s, with most of the work still being carried out by member committees. By 1994, OHO had grown in numbers and influence, and members decided it was time for the organization to both expand its geographic scope to include all of Alameda County and to incorporate as an independent organization. And out of that, East Bay Housing Organizations was born. And that took us into our second decade. So the elections for the first board were held in late 1994, and in January 95, EBHO's first board of directors was seated. By the end of that year, EBHO had adopted and filed articles of incorporation, obtained its 501c3 nonprofit certification. And from its inception, EBHO's stated purpose was to preserve, protect, and expand the supply of affordable housing for lower income people. So we were basically doing the 3 Ps before that term even existed. And then in 1999, EBHO expanded its scope again to include Contra Costa County, and at that point was covering the entire East Bay. EBHO then set out to raise funds from member organizations, local government, foundations, to get enough revenue to hire a full-time executive director and support staff. That's when Community Economics started to provide office space to EBHO, a relationship that has continued to this day. Thank you, CEI. And in those early years, EBHO launched 2 interrelated activities that really gone on for quite a while: the Affordable Housing Education Campaign and Affordable Housing Week, and the first guidebook. And to talk about those, turn it over to Rami Dare.
So I was on that initial board, and I was, like I said, I was super young, and I remember going to the EBHO meetings, which was really, I think, developers, nonprofit developers at the time. It had not yet brought into what EBHO is now in terms of faith members of the faith community and other stakeholders being involved. And there was so much emphasis on how the developers were really having a hard time working in communities where opposition to affordable housing was like probably the number one barrier. And there was just a lack of information about what affordable housing is, like how it's actually well designed. And, this is kind of a nascent thing for us to talk about in the communities at that time. And, and so we had that kind of area of focus. And then the other thing that we realized is that we really need to figure out some sort of revenue stream for EBHO to be able to continue its coalition and advocacy work. So it kind of came together that at that time we developed the affordable housing, I think week at that time, is now expanded to a month, and use that as a way to promote affordable housing, educate the broader public, create tools for us as developers to use and stakeholders to really provide basic information. So we came up with the idea of having a guidebook that would contain all of these good stories and really great basic information as to what affordable housing is and who was behind it, and then ask the nonprofits to contribute to the development of that guidebook, kind of like sponsor pages and stuff like that. So it combined two ideas into one. And I'm really going to credit Alyssa Dennis for coming up with that idea. But it was myself and Blair Miller, who was at Eden Housing at the time, and Alyssa, who worked on this guidebook. And my sister was the initial graphic designer. So that's kind of how that came about.
Great, thanks, Rami. One of the things that was used in that affordable housing education campaign was a set of display boards to highlight how well designed affordable housing was and who lived in it. And we took these around the local government and the community. And these were known as the YIMBY boards, yes, in my backyard. So I'm just going to note that we were using that term way back in the 90s, before today's iteration of that term turned up. So it was in that following period that EBHO launched a number of campaigns, particularly in Oakland, to expand resources for affordable housing and to really make sure that private development included affordable housing benefits, especially once Jerry Brown became mayor and announced his 10K housing plan. And to talk about that, I will turn it over to Alyssa Dennis.
Great. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. Are folks seeing that screen? And what did you say, Jeff? I hit this thing here?
Next one to the right.
Next one to the
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
I'm good. Okay. All right, good. Let me get myself. So you're seeing just the PowerPoint, right? Or are you seeing the okay, good. All right. Sorry about that. So in 1998, people voted for Jerry Brown to become the mayor of Oakland. And one of the first things that he did in early 1999, when he first became mayor, was he went on a little walking tour with city housing staff. And as they walked around, he said, gee, here's a building that looks like it's taking up a whole bunch of space on this lot. What if we tore it down so that we could get some San Francisco developers to build fancy market rate housing here? And the buildings that he was looking at were buildings that had just been rehabbed in that period that Amy and Jeff were describing, where we had the post-earthquake funds. And so buildings like this one, which is the Woodrow Hotel, what now it's called the CL Dellums, but it was the Woodrow Hotel on the corner of 14th and I think it's Clay. And so the housing staff had to actually spend time and resources writing a report to tell Jerry Brown how much it would actually cost to tear down affordable housing. So he wanted to assemble lots, and that evolved into his 10K plan. He wanted to bring 10,000 people to live in downtown Oakland, and that would revitalize downtown Oakland. And it was actually a brilliant idea. For decades, city council and members had been trying to bring back the 1940s and trying to bring back the big department stores and all that kind of thing about what was in Oakland in the 40s and 50s. And that was failing. And Jerry said, let's bring people who have some income and they'll go shopping. And we said, that's brilliant. We embraced that. We said, as long as 25% of that housing that gets built is targeted as affordable, the folks who are going to become the backbone of that revitalization, folks who are going to be working in the hotels and the restaurants and the stores and all that. So we formed the Coalition for Workforce Housing, we called it, with labor organizations, faith organizations, community organizations. And we got together and said, let's push for 25% of this 10K housing to be affordable. So what do you think the mayor said to that? He said, when we met with him, and he was introducing his plan and saying he wanted to build all this new market rate housing, and people pointed to the mayor and they said, Mayor Brown, that's gentrification. And so he furrowed his eyebrows as only Jerry Brown can do, and pointed at the audience and said, if you don't believe in the gentrification of Oakland, then you believe in the, who knows the word?
Slumification.
Slumification.
Well, that was the famous quote that we used in a couple op-ed pieces and that kind of thing. We formed with the Coalition for Workforce Housing, we formed kind of an inside and outside strategy where we had organizing going on to bring people to meetings and all that kind of classic organizing, as well as we had technical skills of folks who could put together architectural kind of design packages and financing packages for how you actually could develop affordable housing within the downtown. The first thing we went after was 4 sites the city put out to bid that the city wanted to sell off for market rate development. We put together a model and said we should get one of those sites, 25%, should be affordable housing. We got a small win out of that. We didn't get one site, but we got was the net proceeds of this from the sale of those sites would go into an affordable housing fund. So it wasn't a ton of money, but it was a good start. What we got out of that was one of those late night, 11 o'clock or so, city council meetings. Former District 2 council member John Russo came running over to us and literally grabbed us by the arms and the jackets and whatever, and said, why are you going after this small stuff? Why don't we change policy so that redevelopment funds, and those of you remember redevelopment in the olden days, from state, the state had a designation that mandate that 20% of funds generated by the redevelopment agency would go to affordable housing. And we worked with John Russo to say, let's make that 25% in Oakland. So that was a huge win because it affected long-term policy, not just one building or one site. So that was a huge win that came out of that. Getting redevelopment funds, of course, redevelopment ended a few years later, but nonetheless, for a decade or more, we had additional funds going into affordable housing every year from that redevelopment funds. What we tried to do then after we won that was to go after what became the kind of the centerpiece of the 10K plan, which was the uptown development by Forest City. Forest City is a huge national developer. They came into town and said, we've developed in Denver, we've developed in LA, we've developed in New York City. We know what affordable housing is. We know that if we're going to build rental housing, we're going to do 20% of that rental housing to be affordable. They met with Jerry about that and they said that. And what do you think Jerry said? Did he say we want affordable housing in this development? Or did he say, no, thank you, Forest City, we don't do that here in Oakland? The city was investing $60 million, which was a lot of money at that time, in collecting sites for the Forest City development, which is roughly San Pablo to Telegraph, 17th to 21st, that area right there. So what we ended up doing there was, again, sort of inside-outside strategy, putting models together, tried to get 2 of those sites that the city had been assembling, and ended up with one site, which was in addition to Forest City's 700 or so units being 20% affordable and getting 5% 3 bedrooms. They weren't going to do any family housing. They were going to do just studios and ones. We got 5% 3 bedrooms. In addition to 20% of that, 700 being affordable, we got the site in back of the Fox Theater, put out an RFP, and they got about 7 responses, and RCD won and built an 80-unit development standalone site within that larger area that you can go by today. And that's 100% affordable. It's about a third 3-bedroom units for families. There were about 12 studio units to replace an old SRO that had been torn down, as well as Section 8 for about, I think a third as well, to serve lower income people. So that really is and that's the picture obviously on the right. So that really is the housing that organizing built. That's kind of set the stage for more campaigns in the decades since then. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Alyssa. And I will note it was also EBHO's advocacy that made sure that even if Jerry didn't include affordable housing in his 10K plan itself, he also didn't get in the way of the housing department continuing to fund housing in the downtown area, and EBHO, kept up the pressure to make sure that happened. In 2000, EBHO advocacy led to the formation of Councilmember Jane Bruner's Affordable Housing Task Force, which had extensive participation by EBHO and EBHO members, which led to some final recommendations, some of which were implemented, some not. Um, uh, um, One of them was consideration of inclusionary zoning, an issue that had been popping up periodically in Oakland. Oakland did not have inclusionary, and that was not adopted at that time. And we'll talk about that a bit more in a little bit. One thing that did come out of that was Oakland's first impact fee, the jobs housing linkage fee, which requires developers of offices and warehouses to pay a fee for affordable housing. That was passed in 2002 and started being collected in 2005, continues today, and is an important source of affordable housing funding for the city even today. In 2002, EBHO helped lead the campaign for the Just Cause for Eviction ballot measure. A bunch of council members had gotten elected pledging that they would support Just Cause, but then didn't actually pass an ordinance. And tenant organizers and housing activists went out, put a measure on the ballot, and that was how Just Cause got added to the existing rent control law. That's also a period when EBHO really started to use housing element updates as an opportunity to do education and advocacy in jurisdictions throughout the East Bay. Another thing that launched during that period was our interfaith organizing campaign. So let me turn it over to Ronnie Boyd.
All right. So I just want to share a little bit about one of our programs. So the interfaith work that EBHO does started in 2003. And it's when we launched our first interfaith organizing campaign. And then we hired an interfaith coordinator for that work, who was Reverend Phil Lawson in 2004. So he was the director for several years before the torch was passed to Sandra Jha. And both folks were very active in Oakland interfaith community, doing work at various congregations to get them involved in not just housing justice, but the other intersecting social justice issues that impact the housing movement. And the program itself has gone through a series of iterations. It used to be called Interfaith Communities United, and they operated more independently for about a decade or so. And now, as of 2024, the program has become more integrated into the organization. But one of the things that came out of that work is our annual interfaith breakfast. We had our first gathering in 2005, where we invited a number of East Bay interfaith leaders to breakfast, to build community, to network, to break bread, to talk about how can faith leaders in the East Bay really bring a moral lens and a moral charge to housing justice and to the housing crisis that we're currently experiencing. So the way I understand faith and justice is that we are providing moral leadership on affordable housing advocacy. So you might not be a person of faith, but if you are, you might be aware that faith communities have always had a role in trying to bring about a better and more improved society, and that includes housing. And then this last year and a half, we were involved in the SB4 campaign to bring about greater access for faith-based institutions and nonprofit colleges to build affordable housing on their property. The bill streamlined the process and got rid of some of the zoning expectations that now opened up a serious amount of land that faith communities could build on. This was a really great success because one of the ways that we're seeing faith communities are responding to lack of affordable housing is to use their own land to build on and to be a part of the solution. So we have been exploring affordable housing opportunities for folks that have property. And we recently, for Affordable Housing Month, held a panel and a fair where we invited housing advocates, faith leaders, and folks in the affordable housing community to learn about what the process is to build affordable housing on church land, and to provide an opportunity for those congregations to speak to a developer, to speak to an architect, to learn what the process is actually like, so they know what they're going to sign up for. And we're going to continue to be an educational and community resource for the faith-based institutions that we are connected to. And I see that we're going further. But right now we are being organizationally led by the Faith and Justice Committee that decides what work and projects they want to do to further the organizing goals of EBHO. So yeah, I hope that explains everything.
Jeff, you are muted.
I'm sorry. Thanks, Ronnie. That was wonderful history. We're going to move on now to our third decade, 2005 to 2014. That third decade was a period of growth and expansion for the organization. Our organizational and individual membership increased significantly. Our staff grew, and we expanded our work into new geographic areas and into new programs. And to talk about some of the work during that period, let me start with Anthony Federico.
Thanks, Jeff, and hi, everyone. So I'm Anthony. I started as an administrative assistant on a part-time and temporary basis for EBHO, covering for someone's parental leave in 2011. And I continued to work for EBHO for a number of years, becoming associate director over 2015 and 17. And during that period, I got to be part of the organization's continued growth into suburban advocacy and organizing. And that included long-term work in Walnut Creek and Fremont, and shorter-term initiatives in Newark, Union City, Lafayette, and other communities. I want to highlight the Walnut Creek work, given that we had a sustained multi-year member campaign there with a big win at the end of it, thank goodness. So Walnut Creek, if you don't know it, is a smaller, more conservative, more affluent community that is growing and evolving into a more urbanized suburb. I hope nobody objects to that characterization. And there has been anxiety about new development and growth and densification, but the community has also had a huge housing affordability problem, and city leaders recognized that and identified an area of town called the West Downtown, which, no surprise, is south of BART and just west of the traditional downtown core in Walnut Creek. And they committed to doing a transit-oriented development plan there to attract more housing, office, retail, and infrastructure. And just like EBHO always does, members showed up and said, yes, this is fantastic, and we're supportive so long as this new vision for the West Downtown includes a strong commitment to affordable housing and balanced growth. And hey, EBHO members also said that we contain lots of experts who can help you do that. So that was the nature of a EBHO member campaign and community coalition campaign over the next 5 or so years, from 2012 to 2017, that consisted of local affordable housing residents who were in the membership at the time, lots of faith community members and leaders through Contra Costa's Multi-Faith Action Coalition. And so then fast forward literally through 100 plus city council meetings and planning commission meetings to 2017, where by the end, the city council voted with us for our plan to dramatically increase the affordable housing impact fee, commit to continuing to use the Armory as a winter shelter, and other wins. And this gave a huge boost to the resources available for affordable housing development and preservation for years and generations to come. And in the bigger picture, like, further established EBHO's presence in Contra Costa and our connections to community there and to elected leaders. And that was fantastic work that I was very proud to be a part of with a lot of EBHO members. And I'll pass it back to Jeff.
Thank you, Anthony. I'll just note during that period also is when we started doing more housing element advocacy out in suburban areas. So for the 5th cycle housing elements gearing up in 2013, 2014, and into 2015, we were also active in a number of other locations: Concord, Fremont, and a few other places around the Bay Area, particularly where we could find local groups on the ground that we could work with and assist to really push for more affordable housing in those local housing plans. One of our biggest campaigns in the suburban area that has gone on for quite a while was the campaign around base reuse at the Concord Naval Weapons Station. And to talk about that, let me turn it over to Gloria Bruce.
Hey everyone, I'm so glad to be here today. I'm just a couple blocks away from EBHO's offices, which, by the way, some of the nicest nonprofit offices in town, thanks to the hospitality of community economics. You can see how long I've been involved with EBHO. I've got my 10-year-old EBHO t-shirt on today, EBHO at 30. And the Concord Naval Weapons Station, we were working on it almost 20 years ago. We're still working on it, but it's an amazing example of what Anthony started to talk about and what other speakers have started to address about how EBHO has been so amazingly able to spread into new geographies to bring other folks beyond the really important core of affordable housing providers and developers on board, while always staying true to that mission of affordable housing. And right around 2007, 2008, and there was and is a giant decommissioned naval base in the city of Concord. We got together with the faith-based organizing group Cisco, and with a number of other community organizations, labor organizations, environmental organizations, including Greenbelt Alliance and Save Mount Diablo, to come together and say, hey, this is one of the biggest development opportunities in the East Bay. Excuse me, getting over a cold. Let's not let this go to waste. We've learned a lot from our work in Oakland and Berkeley and other places. And this is an amazing opportunity to make sure we build affordable housing from the ground up. So for many years, we organized in Concord. I'll just throw a link in the chat to the city's website about the Concord reuse project. It's not a super exciting website, but you get some really cool visuals if you've never seen this land of what it looks like and what it can be. And we came together for years organizing, and in 2012 won a really groundbreaking plan that's been able to be used as a precedent and talking point in community benefits campaigns and affordable housing campaigns throughout the Bay Area, where we got that city council to commit that 25% of the 12,000 homes slated to be built on that base would be affordable to people of limited means. That's huge. 25% of 12,000 homes. Do the math. That's 3,000 homes. It's pretty exciting. And I think now I can ask you all to put in the chat, some of you know, how many of those homes have been built in Concord as of today, how many of those homes have been broken ground for? 0. Deborah got it. 0. So is this an example where we're like, yes, we saw it, it came to fruition? No, not yet. I won't get into all the twists and turns of why this project has had so many ups and downs, except to say that Natalie Bondewitt, who was here earlier, one of our true Concord stalwarts, she's worked on several of these military base reuse projects. And she has said it takes 20 years from the first plan until you break ground on these things, because she's worked on Treasure Island for 20 years, and that's how long it took. We're getting there. But here's the thing. We saw what happens when you work with a broad community coalition and you take the time to build the relationships, to educate with humility, but also bringing your expertise. And when you talk with, and you build relationships on the ground, and we saw the attitudes of the city council change from affordable housing, what's that, to at this point, there's all sorts of debates going on about that project, but whether or not housing needs to be affordable is not one of the main debates. There's a lot of details, but that was a major effort for us, and we're still plugging along and present there. So I'll leave it there for now because we have a lot more to cover, but glad to tell that story a bit.
Thank you, Gloria. That is really an incredible story, and the work that's gone into it and the coalitions and partners that EBHO has formed, I think is really indicative of the way that EBHO approaches work, particularly on major campaigns like that. Apart from expanding where we were working, we also really dug deep into organizing, and it was during this period that we launched our resident community organizing program to work with residents of affordable housing. And I'm going to turn it over first to Ronnie Boyd and then to William Goodwin to talk about the RCOP.
Yeah, so EBHO has an organizing program called Resident Community Organizing Program, RCOP. And what it does is that it organizes folks that live in affordable housing and or support affordable housing efforts. And the first organizer was hired was in 2008. And residents play a key role in affordable housing advocacy at both the local and state levels. And they also do leadership development, policy advocacy, and on the ground community organizing. And one of the highlights of our COP is that there was an extensive campaign to win affordable housing and community improvements as part of the Broadway Valdez specific plans. So our folks are very committed, they're very active, and as part of our commitment to centering folks who are most impacted in the work for affordable housing. I want to turn over to William Goodwin, who has experience in RCOP, who will share that with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. Yeah, the Resident Community Organizing Program has grown in its coalition building and matured over the years, not just in membership, but in power, working on many other campaigns such as the Oakland United Coalition and what's going to happen with the Howard's Terminal Project, local and state election and voter registration and engagement, inviting members to learn about the Oakland's housing element, and also what it looks like to have participatory budgeting as a process. EBHO extended that power by reserving several seats on the board of directors, specifically for resident members. That includes myself now, and I live in Contra Costa, so I sort of benefited from that expansion in 1999. But the Resident Community Organizing Program has also prepared members to serve on other boards, such as Housing California and Resources for Community Development. My service on the board and commissions is owed in great measure to my experience and what I learned as a member of the Resident Community Organizing Program. In 2019, I was eager to serve on EBHO's board after graduating Leadership Academy And so EBHO leveraged its relationship with another organization, Urban Habitat, and introduced me to their program, which is the Board and Commissions Leadership Institute. And I learned what it would be like to serve on at my community on a board. And so again, that is how you build resident power. And so, yeah, my experience with resident community organizing program has been fantastic. And I think it's back to you, Jeff.
Thank you, William. Let's see. In the mid 2000s, one of Oakland's oldest nonprofit developers encountered some substantial financial problems, and they had an extensive portfolio of affordable housing that was at risk of being lost. EBHO organized East Bay nonprofits to work together with the city to preserve over half a dozen projects by transferring ownership and investing in their rehab. A serious piece of preservation work that held on to an important investment in a really important affordable housing resource out there in the community. It was also in early to mid 2000s that issues like inclusionary zoning and strengthening Oakland's condo conversion ordinance came up again. And to talk about that, let's turn it over to Mike Rawson.
Thank you, Jeff. I first want to say that I was glad to hear Mary Ann Leshin talk about what it was like when we first started OHO back in small rooms in the Asian Resource Center, where it was the very beginning of us as housing advocates, and that at that time, tenant advocates, realizing that it's more than just organizing for tenants' rights. If we're going to be an organization that will really solve and provide housing for everyone, we have to get together and do all three Ps. And that's what was going on in that small room back in the beginning when OHO first began. Tenants' rights advocates, the nascent affordable housing development community, and their supporters, and expanding that into the concept of workforce housing and bringing in the community partners for that and the interfaith organizing. All that was something that was absolutely necessary to reaching the point there that we reached in the mid 2000s, where we were able to participate and advocate for the creation of the Blue Ribbon Housing Commission. You've heard from many of the presenters about as OHO and then EBHO developed, there was an effort to bring resources into developing affordable housing, that you can protect affordable housing and you can protect tenants' rights. But what we really have to do is expand the resources for affordable housing. And we did that by, one of the ways we did that was by advocating for the implementation of inclusionary zoning in communities throughout the state. Whereas in the 1970s and early 80s, the advocacy was for rent control in communities throughout the state, we realized we had to do more than that. We had to bring our redevelopment resources, as Alyssa talked about, to focus not on just redeveloping and gentrifying Oakland, but developing affordable housing and being dedicated to develop affordable housing. And we also had to make sure that if development is going to happen, it's got to happen with development for people who can't afford market rate housing. If it doesn't happen, the situation is going to get worse. So for years, we've been advocating for Oakland to adopt an inclusionary zoning ordinance, as others have talked about. And there was it was the Jane Bruner, city council member at that time, led efforts, had her own housing coalition, housing task force. And through that effort and through the organizing efforts of EBHO and others in the community, we were able to bring to council a substantial, robust advocacy effort asking for the city to adopt inclusionary zoning. That came to loggerheads, and that had been at loggerheads before the city for years, but finally, the council agreed to appoint a Blue Ribbon Housing Commission because of the advocacy that had been done by EBHO and others. Now, part of that Blue Ribbon Housing Commission was a co-optation of the organizing strength of EBHO in the housing community. Part of it was because just anytime you start a commission to study something, that's a way to deal with the successful advocacy and try to derail it and put it over to the side. We knew that was happening, but the commission that was put together, and there was a member on the commission appointed by each city council member. And so I was appointed by Nancy Nadell, who was a city council member from West Oakland at the time. Got on this commission, and our task was to study, think about inclusionary zoning, alternatives to inclusionary zoning, and also other affordable housing needs that we had, one of which was increasing the strength of Oakland's condo conversion ordinance, which had been adopted early on, a kind of unique ordinance back in the 1980s with the advocacy of OHO, but it needed to be strengthened. And so, true to the co-optation model, this commission went on for a good part of a year, probably more than a year, but it had substantial support, as Jeff talked about earlier, from despite what certain council members might think, despite what the mayor's position was, it had substantial support from the staff of the city of Oakland and continuous advocacy support on the outside. And although it didn't result in inclusionary zoning, it came up with a recommendation, as I believe Jeff talks about in the text, that the city adopt inclusionary zoning. And also and that came out of the staff doing, it would have been a moderate inclusionary zoning. The staff did research and hired consultants to look at what the feasibility of inclusionary was in each sector of Oakland, in each district in Oakland. And so the kind of inclusionary zoning that would have happened would have been different depending on the region. A little, we didn't all agree with that, but that's what we were able to achieve consensus on. We were also able to achieve consensus on a revision of the condominium conversion ordinance that would have done several things. It would have made it stronger, and it would have increased the amount of relocation assistance that would have gone along with the conversion of condominiums. It would also have created a first right of refusal for condominium for the tenants where conversions were happening. Got consensus on both those things, but then it was referred to council, and what happened? Well, the co-optation had been successful in some ways because it coincided with the beginnings of the Great Recession and the changes on city council. So all of a sudden, there was not the political will to adopt inclusionary zoning because the standard argument against inclusionary zoning was, well, if you start inclusionary zoning, the same kind of argument that's used against rent control. Inclusionary zoning, if you have one of those in a time period where we're not developing enough housing, you're just going to increase the length of the time of the recession, so we can't do it. Not true. Jurisdiction studies have shown that inclusionary housing is not what stops development in a community. What stops development in a community is the economy. When the economy slows down like it is right now, that's when development stops. It's not because of rent control, not because of inclusionary zoning, not because of housing impact fee. So I'm very proud of this part of what EBHO did because we got a commission to focus on the things we wanted to focus on. And I'm proud of being part of EBHO because if it wasn't for the existence of EBHO and OHO before that, we wouldn't have got to this. Wasn't because of that organizing, we wouldn't have got to that plateau that we got to. And it's not for naught. We have, as Jeff described earlier, we have our housing impact fee. We're trying to make it stronger. We have our city council members who might want to make it stronger. So I'll turn it back to Jeff. So proud that the organizing that was done has shown results and still is showing results.
Great, thank you, Michael. One other thing that happened during that decade in 2012, Governor Brown proposed and the legislature approved the elimination of redevelopment in California, which in one fell swoop took $1 billion statewide out of support for affordable housing. It was a big blow, and the tax increment money that redevelopment agencies had been collecting was then returned to the various taxing entities at the local level, the cities, the counties, the school districts. So that money was coming back as what we called boomerang funds. And EBHO launched a campaign to make sure that a portion of those boomerang funds would go to affordable housing. It wasn't as much as we were getting from redevelopment, but it was still important. In Oakland, we got a commitment for 25% of the boomerang funds, and Alameda County also devoted boomerang funds to its housing program. So let's move on to the current decade. It's been a period of expanding our membership. Our staff has nearly doubled in the last 10 years. Our advocacy efforts and organizing work were broader in scope and more deeply involved in specific issues and places. We've done a lot of work recently on anti-displacement, tenant rights, and preservation. We did finally get changes to the Oakland Condo Ordinance and the SRO Preservation Ordinance, did work on tenants' rights in Oakland, Concord, unincorporated Alameda County, and elsewhere. We worked on the COVID eviction moratoriums and more. Of particular note, in the last decade, EBHO has really been involved in a lot of campaigns to expand local resources for affordable housing. So let me give it back to Gloria.
Thank you, Jeff. We're in our last decade, in our last 5 minutes, so I'll try to be as quick as possible. One of the things they always say is that the 3 main ingredients to get affordable housing built are land, money, and political and public will. EBHO has always worked on all 3 of those fronts, and in the last decade, we really amplified just the hard resources that are needed for that. So we did a lot of work and are still doing a lot of work on public land for public good, which is a phrase that Jeff helped us center in our messaging. We were involved in figuring out how a big prominent parcel next to Lake Merritt in Oakland could be developed in a fair and transparent way with affordable housing for all. And many, many years later, it's so exciting that what was once going to be mixed income, which is good, we need mixed income housing, but the process for which it came about was not what the people wanted to see. And now we're seeing affordable housing built on that land due to the organizing of many folks around town, including EBHO, following some of the policy issues. We followed public lands on the ins and outs around the Coliseum. We don't have our A's with us anymore, but we're still tracking to make sure that that land is redeveloped in a fair way. And then I would be really remiss if I didn't mention in 30 seconds, we can never do justice to 40 years of history in an hour. But I really have to mention that it's within the last 8 to 10 years that EBHO really stepped into electoral politics and got people, a broad coalition to come out and support affordable housing bonds. In 2016, $580 million for affordable housing. Voters said yes to that in Alameda County. And we have 3,000 affordable housing units and counting that are being built because of that. I'll post something in the chat. I'm still on the oversight committee for that bond. So if you want to know if that money is getting used, it definitely is. We fought for an impact fee in Oakland, and we are continuing. We fought for a couple of other infrastructure bonds in Oakland and in Berkeley, pretty much successful almost across the board in the 2016 and 2020 elections, while we were also working on the tenants' rights fronts and other issues. So really just pushing to bring in millions of dollars of revenue, get that land locked down, and advance housing justice through all that.
Thank you, Gloria. Trying to pack a lot in for our last decade. We also, in these recent years, have expanded our organizing efforts. I want to go back to William to just briefly touch on Leadership Academy and RUN, if you will.
Yes, I will. Thank you, Jeff. So our Leadership Academy was launched in 2015. Leadership Academy is free to our community. And since its inception in 2015, EBHO has graduated over 100 affordable housing residents and staff leaders. Many of them have gone on to serve in local and state boards and commissions and draft policy that has been implemented statewide. EBHO also invites Leadership Academy graduates to join one of its committees. They have several committees, and as we know, shared space is shared power. And so when Leadership Academy graduates join those committees, they learn different aspects of policy development, and it becomes a critical role in helping to center the affordable housing resident experience and make sure that residents play a key role in policy development. And RUN is it's Resident Empowerment Network, Resident United Network. It is an organization that we partner with. Its parent is Housing California, and Resident United was founded in 2014 and builds power among residents and staff of affordable housing to change laws in California at a state level to make housing safe and affordable for everyone. It is a collection of voices that teaches residents to navigate the legislative cycle and how to address state assembly members and senators and learn how to organize campaigns and be a part of the bigger housing movement. It culminates with Lobby Day, where we go and lobby for policies that affect and impact residents. Yeah, that is it in a quick nutshell. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, William. We are right at 2 o'clock. I understand if people need to go, but if people do want to stick around for a few more minutes, I think in the next 5 to 10 minutes, we will be able to wrap up. We're also recording this, and I hope that we'll be able to make this available through our study room or elsewhere. So if you need to go, that we understand. Let me take a minute also, because one of our other founding members is in the room. I'm going to put him on the spot for a minute just to wave and say hi. But Mike Piatok has been a strong and active member of EBHO from the beginning. So Mike, good to see you here, and thanks for joining us. I'm going to just move on, talk about another organizing effort as we try and deepen our involvement in the suburbs. So Davina, let me turn it over to you.
Sweet. Thank you, Jeff. So I'll make this real quick since we're over, but I'm here to talk about RSOP, which is one of the latest projects that EBHO is taking on. RSOP is short for the Regional Suburban Organizing Project, and it's coordinated by NPH and funded by CZI. And so EBHO is working alongside 8 other Bay Area-based organizations to expand our outreach and impact in suburban areas. We know these areas have historically been neglected in the sense that there's been a lot of untapped potential there and a lot of energy that have yet to be mobilized. That is until RSOP. And so our ultimate goal here is to grow our organizing capacity and to advance campaigns for housing justice in the suburbs. Our goal is to do this through our CEP, which is the Civic Engagement Program. And this was originally planned for the summer of 2023, but due to capacity and other issues, it is now looking like 2024 is going to be an amazing opportunity for this. And so while we cannot directly lobby with the funding provided by this, we're going to have the chance to survey prospective voters and develop our future messaging about affordable housing to see what works, what doesn't work for these groups. And given that California is going to see some significant opportunities for housing justice on the ballot with all the different measures on homelessness, housing affordability, and tenant rights, the hope is that this campaign will be a robust power building ecosystem in the suburbs, putting organizing and base building at the core of our efforts. So yeah, thanks everyone, and I'm going to hand it off to Jeff to finish this out.
Great, thank you, Davina. Just very quickly so we can wrap up, the other thing that has gone on in the last decade is that EBHO has really deepened its involvement in state and regional work. So at the state level, we've been doing a lot of work around state legislation, working with NPH and Housing California and other statewide coalitions. We have a regional policy committee, somewhat misnamed because it also works on some state and local things. We do direct lobbying by meeting with legislators and submitting position letters on a host of legislation. And belong to a number of statewide coalitions, Development Without Displacement Network, the Stable Housing Network, Housing Now, and others. At the regional level, we were involved in getting BART to adopt its affordable housing policy, winning a commitment that when housing is built on BART-owned land, at least 20% at each station will be affordable, and 30 to 35% across the whole BART system will be affordable. And there are a number of projects going up right now consistent with that. We were involved with Plan Bay Area, which is the region's plan to integrate land use, transportation, and housing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That led into work with a group called CASA, which was working on a housing plan for the Bay Area, where we were very strongly pushing the 3Ps framework to make sure that that group did not focus only on production of new housing, but that protection of tenants and preservation of existing affordable housing was part of that. We then got involved with the most recent housing element cycle and RENA to make sure that affirmatively furthering fair housing was a strong part of jurisdictions' housing elements. And we have been involved with the Bay Area Housing Finance Agency, which grew out of the CASA work as the first regional housing agency. And that leads us to today, our 2024 campaign to pass a $10 to $20 billion regional housing bond. The final vote to put that on the ballot is coming up next month with BAFA's board. You'll be hearing a lot more about this game-changing measure in the months to come. This would raise enough money to help the region come to meeting close to half of its lower income RENA, which is quite significant. It's substantially more money than has ever been adopted, even at the state level. So this will be a really big deal. You'll be hearing more about it. We'll be asking everybody to get involved in that campaign, so stay tuned. And that gets us to the end of our presentation. Thanks for hanging in there, and thank you to all of our panelists for their stories. And it's great to see everybody. The only thing I'm going to is we've cut a lot out. There's a lot more to our story, but we hope that you did enjoy what we presented today. And as I said, we are recording this and hope that it will be made available. And stay tuned for announcements about future Lunch and Learn events coming up each month. So thank you very much. Great to see everybody here.